Hello, welcome to Inspinar. I am Dr. Nidhi Gupta, pediatric endocrinologist and digital wellness coach in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Susan Peirce Thompson is a multiple New York Times best-selling author and founder of Bright Line Eating Solutions. Through this company, Susan is dedicated to helping 1 million people have their bright transformations by year 2030. Susan, welcome to Inspinar.
Thank you, Dr. Needy. I'm so glad to be here. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Tell us, how did Bright Line Eating come about?
Well, it was a long, harrowing, difficult journey of addiction, really, that I was on personally. So I started using drugs when I was 14, and the drugs escalated from alcohol, pot, mushrooms, acid, ecstasy to crystal meth. I got hopelessly addicted to crystal meth and used it until I dropped out of high school, and had drug-induced psychosis. And then I did quit that and then got hooked on cocaine and then started freebasing it and then started smoking crack cocaine and then turned to prostitution. So at the age of 19, my resume was I was a high school dropout, I was a crack addict, and I was a prostitute. And I was living without a key to a place that I lived in San Francisco. I got struck clean and sober through a 12-step program when I was 20 years old. So I haven't had a drink or a drug now in 30 years, which is a miracle. But my addiction jumped right to food. And before I knew it, I was living with clinical obesity in my 20s. And I was working the 12 steps. I was turning my life around, and it got a lot better. I went to community college. I'm so grateful for the community college system. And then transferred to UC Berkeley and got 4.0s and spoke at the graduation, all the while I was getting fatter and fatter and fatter and more miserable with my food addiction. But I was eating while I was studying. I think a lot of people with food addiction use caffeine and sugar and overeating to fuel their success. And so I did that for many years. I got a PhD in brain and cognitive sciences and studied the brain because I was very curious what was going on with me and my addictive brain. And ultimately, I ended up figuring out how to lose my excess weight when I was 28 years old. So I've been now we call it a bright body. Every person has a body that's right sized for them. And I've been in that body for me, for 20 years now. And I became a tenured psychology professor. And then 10 years ago, I got a message in my morning meditation to write a book explaining the neuroscience of sustainable weight loss and how the brain responds to certain foods as if they're drugs, and to help explain to people why they can't lose weight, why they're struggling so much. And I think this is even more relevant today with these weight loss drugs that people are so eager to be on. But that's how Bright Line Eating was born, basically out of my own struggles with drug addiction and then food addiction, and my own success losing my excess weight and keeping it off now for 20 years.
You got a message in your morning meditation to write a book about how does brain respond to certain foods. So Susan, how does brain respond to certain foods like a drug?
Well, the foods are mainly sugar and flour, which is to say ultra processed foods, right? And what they do is they hit certain areas of the brain, just like drugs of abuse, just like cocaine, just like heroin. They cause a huge dopamine flood that downregulates the dopamine receptors. And what that does is it produces cravings, right? Where you get a hankering for a certain food, you can't get it out of your mind, you drive across town to get it, or you open your app and you order it. Other foods that are in the cupboard or the refrigerator, they won't do it. You need that specific food. That is dopamine downregulation. And there's only certain foods that drive that process. It's the sugar and flour, it's the ultra processed foods. They also create an endocrinological nightmare, which you're very familiar with, which is leptin resistance, right? What happens is You eat these sugar, flour, ultra processed foods. They drive up your insulin, your inflammation, and your triglycerides. And those three things together block leptin at the brain. So, right in this nucleus of the hypothalamus that is responsible for regulating our eating behavior, the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus, that inflammation there blocks the hormone leptin. And that's a tragedy because leptin is what tells your brain that you're full and that you want to get moving. And when that fullness signal, that satiety signal never comes, you just keep eating as if you never get full. So this is where people have eaten a full dinner, but they still have a hankering to eat. It's not that the belly wants to be fuller. It's that the elbow wants to bend, the mouth wants to chew, the brain needs more. And so they've just eaten a big dinner, but now they're going to the freezer for ice cream. Now they're scraping out the last bit of the ice cream. Now they're going to the cupboard for a bag of chips. They're finishing the bag of chips. That's not regular hunger. That's what I call insatiable hunger, and it's driven by leptin resistance. So really, truly, the brain is being hijacked, and it's causing patterns of eating that have never been seen before because these foods are not natural foods. They're actually drugs.
Driving eating patterns that have never been seen before. Over the last 20 years of your work, have you noticed a drastic change in how we as a community perceive food, buy food, cook food, or don't cook food, and consume food?
Yeah, these trends have been happening for a long time. I think they started 50 and 60 years ago with the proliferation of snack foods. Sugar and sweeteners became way cheaper when high fructose corn syrup was invented. Food companies realized they could make a lot of money packaging ultra processed foods that would have long shelf lives and be able to travel long distances without needing refrigeration. They could get foods into areas, in Nairobi and Bangladesh where it's not easy to manufacture or make food fresh, but it's very easy to ship food that's packaged and will last for years and years and years in a bag. So we've got this new category of food, and about 2/3 of the calories that we're consuming are not really what our great grandparents would have considered to be food. They're ultra processed food, which technically doesn't even meet the definition for food. It's not actually food. It's edible, but it's not actually food. It doesn't do what food does in the body. It does other stuff that's not good. But it is made up of calories and you can eat it, and it's changing the brain. And it's now most of what we're eating these days.
It is changing the brain, and unfortunately, that is what most of us are eating these days. I often come across situations in my clinic where families express without any hesitation that food is their go-to source for everything from celebrations to socializing to teenagers killing boredom. They are home over the summer. They don't know what to do with themselves. Kitchen is readily available at home, and it's easy to reach for food. In situations like those where food is such a strong part and parcel of our daily life, Susan, how do we differentiate food addiction from, oh, well, it's just a way of life?
That's a great question because lots of people are eating unhealthfully and eating a lot of ultra processed foods and don't have food addiction. And food addiction exists on a continuum. There's a quiz that people can take at foodaddictionquiz.com that will tell them where they are on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being high. And a lot of people have an addictive relationship with food. They have some of the symptoms where maybe they eat more than they anticipate sometimes. Maybe they often try to eat healthier but fail again and again. However, what they don't have is a clinical pattern of behavior that demonstrates marked dysfunction or distress. But some people at the upper end of that continuum have significant dysfunction or distress. Their health is in significant distress. Their mindset is in significant distress, where they have what we call food chatter, where they're spending way too much time thinking about what they've eaten or not eaten, whether they're on their plan or off their plan, how many miles, how many calories, how many pounds. If I eat less of this, is it okay for me to indulge tonight at the party? I indulged last night at the party, so I need to eat less today, and on and on and on. It's a rat race in their head, obsessing about this stuff, and they frequently lose control over how much they eat once they start. They often don't feel satisfied by a normal amount of food. And they have a lot of despair and despondency about their relationship with food. That's the territory where we start to call it food addiction.
We identified some of the factors that probably drive food addiction. One could be dopamine. Second is leptin resistance. Third is our tendency to eat when we are bored. Are there other factors that drive food addiction? Maybe genetics, something in the environment, taking a leaf from your own life. What drove your food addiction and what makes people addicted to food?
Great question. Genetics are definitely involved. We know from lots of research that addiction is genetic. It's not utterly, completely, entirely genetic, but genetics plays a role. A moderate role, kind of like how extroversion and IQ are hereditary, maybe about 50 to 60% of the variance is accounted for by genetics. Addiction is sort of in that realm. So you can look through family trees and you can see the alcoholics, addicts, smokers, people with obesity, right, all through the family tree. It's like that. But we also know there's rodent studies showing with rodents, it's pretty clear there's addictable rats and non-addictable rats, and you can mate them together, and you can mate two non-addictable rats together, and they'll give birth to a bunch of otherwise non-addictable rats. But then you can raise some of them in extremely adverse conditions, like without a mom, with food insecurity, with their feet being shocked periodically. And what you'll find is that not all, but some percentage of those rats will turn into addictable rats. And so you can look at something like the ACE questionnaire, the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire, and see that addiction also correlates with environmental stressors and trauma for sure. So those are some of the factors that pave the way for addiction. But I will say that susceptibility to addiction doesn't guarantee a specific addiction. So for example, I'm as susceptible as they come. I've got addiction in my family, and various stressors definitely paved the way for a life of addiction. And I've never had gambling addiction or shopping addiction. I have had drug addiction, alcohol addiction, cigarette addiction, sex addiction, food addiction. So I've had a lot of them. What happens is in a certain domain, at the right moment, you use something and the brain goes, yeah, that'll do. That hit the spot. And your brain remembers the cues that predicted that reward, and it'll seek it out again and maybe get another hit at another time and goes, oh, yeah, there it is again. We liked that. And then you're wiring up addiction in a certain domain. It takes time to do.
Wiring up addiction in a certain domain of the brain that makes a person more predisposed to maybe food addiction versus gambling addiction versus smartphone addiction. A lot of the factors that you mentioned that drive food addiction also seem to be driving smartphone addiction. Is that a behavior, Susan, that you have noticed in the patients or the clients that you work with, that if they have predisposition to one type of addiction, they are likely to be addicted to something else as well to make up for it or to replace it?
Yeah, it's called cross addiction, and it's a very real phenomenon. So once you're depriving the brain of its dopamine in a certain area, it wants to get it somewhere else, and it doesn't really care where it comes from. So it leaves you vulnerable to very quickly developing a replacement addiction. And so you have to be careful about that. And often it takes, I mean, for me, I've been in recovery now for 30 years. And I have to say, it's just in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm noticing myself living, I would say, knock on wood and thank you, God, but really right now, utterly free from any addiction. I don't have caffeine or addiction or smartphone addiction or any particular infatuation with any particular person, or there's nothing that is driving me addictively. But for most of the last 30 years, I was still getting ensnared by this or that here and there, and finding that my brain is just sticky. It wants to glom onto things and use them excessively. And I've got to always be careful about that.
You've got to always be careful about things that your brain is predisposed to sticking to. Beautiful. Susan, the mission of Bright Line Eating is to help people conquer cravings and be free from food thoughts. How does it work?
Well, it turns out that for certain people, those people who are higher on that food addiction susceptibility scale, so the sevens, eights, nines, tens on the scale, for those people, it turns out that a bright line is freeing. A bright line is a clear, unambiguous boundary that you just don't cross. Like if you're going to quit smoking, you don't pick up cigarettes at all, not even at a party on a Saturday night and imagine you'll just quit smoking again on Monday morning. You don't smoke. That's a bright line. It's a clear boundary. And we have bright lines for sugar, flour, meals, and quantities. And we create such clear boundaries around our food that with any given bite of food, we know whether it's on our plan or off our plan at that moment. Even a baby carrot, if it's 3 in the afternoon and you've already had lunch and it's not dinner time, that baby carrot is off your plan because you don't eat in between meals. And that kind of clarity turns out to be freeing. So we have data on thousands of people showing that within just 2 months on bright line eating, their peace and serenity with food goes way up, and their hunger goes down, their cravings go down, their weight flies off, and suddenly they find themselves living with a brain that they hardly even recognize because they have so much freedom and neutrality around food. It just flies in the face of everything that they've been told, that if they stop eating dessert, they'll just go mad craving dessert all the time. It turns out not to be true. The opposite is true.
When people are able to recognize their bright line around sugar, flour, quantity, and what was the fourth thing, Susan?
Meals.
Meals. That's when bright transformations start happening. Beautiful. Now tell us, what does latest research show in terms of comparing the approach with bright line eating programs versus semaglutide, Wegovy, and Ozempic? How do the two compare?
Great question. Well, there's data published on this. I can give you some links to share if you like with your readers. There was a review article that was just published on this. And what the research shows is that the weight loss results are almost identically comparable. With a couple of differences, bright line eating helps people lose weight faster in the first 2 months, almost twice as fast. And that's because people start on Wegovy or Ozempic slowly. They have to wean onto it so that they don't get too nauseous, right? But bright line eating helps you lose weight fast right away. The other difference, then at year 1 and year 2, the weight loss results are identical. And then at year 4, 5, and 6, bright line eating does way better again. Long term, it looks like Ozempic and Wegovy stop working quite as well and people regain a little bit of weight. But with bright line eating, the results are very stellar all the way out through year 6, which is the longest that's been published. So the weight loss results are very comparable. Now, how are they achieving the same results? Well, bright line eating, just by changing how you eat, is achieving the same results of less hunger and fewer cravings. So semaglutide impacts the satiety systems by slowing down digestion, slowing gastric emptying, and making people feel full for a lot longer. But it also, GLP-1 has receptors in the reward centers of the brain that squelch food cravings. And bright line eating has that same result, but essentially naturally. There are ways of eating that release GLP-1, the main active ingredient or main hormone in semaglutide. And you do that through more mastication, so more chewing of whole real food, through consuming more fiber, and through letting go of the sugar and flour that were driving the addictive response in the first place. And with that combination, you actually get the same results. So it's interesting because in bright line eating, there are side effects. Some of the side effects are more energy, more feelings of being loved, supported, and connected in the world, less depression. This is all published data. We have hard data on this. Fewer days of poor mental health, and greater happiness and flourishing and life satisfaction, which compares very favorably to the side effects of semaglutide are things like, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach pain, and sometimes full gastric blockage. And then there's I don't know if you saw the recent study on the eye issues people are having. It's leading to some blindness and to some retinal dysfunction, which is pretty scary, and not a trivially small percentage of people. We're talking like 6 to 9% of people. So that's concerning as well.
That is concerning and very scary as well. And it sounds like it is possible to nurture our GLP-1 naturally by masticating some more, by having bright lines around sugar, salt, and flour, and being mindful of the cravings. Is
Not
that right?
salt. Yeah,
Not
just
salt,
being
sugar,
mindful
salt,
of sugar and flour. Yeah,
sugar and flour.
sugar, flour, ultra processed foods.
Sugar, flour, ultra processed food. Beautiful. Now, Susan, I also come across families who firmly believe that their child is overweight or obese because the child does not move. Do you feel physical activity is overrated when it comes to weight loss?
I actually do. And the studies show that, believe it or not. So I know that we think that it's got to be true that we're just more sedentary and that's what's leading to the obesity epidemic. But it turns out that that's not the case. So, for example, we have ways now, even molecule by molecule, of measuring people's metabolisms. And it turns out that, like, hunter-gatherer tribes that are always on the move, there are still some of those people, like tribes alive on planet Earth. And researchers have gone and studied them and actually measured molecule for molecule their metabolisms, and they're burning no more calories every day than a sedentary office worker at a desk job. And you think, well, that's obscene. Of course, the person who's hardly taking 2,000 steps a day isn't burning as many calories as the person who's walking all day to find their food. But it turns out that the brain is very savvy. It knows that if you're walking all day to find your food, it's got to conserve energy at all other times. And it does. It toggles the dials of thyroid hormone and other types of, the muscle expenditure of energy per step. And it shifts all these things so that those two people are actually burning the same amount of calories over the course of a week, which is kind of stunning. And then the actual behavioral data back this up, where they take large samples of people and assign them to different groups of exercise levels, and they don't lose any weight. Like, the people all don't lose weight. And it's like, we know some of them are exercising a lot more because they're doing it actually with a personal trainer watching them. So I have a whole ebook on how exercise doesn't make you thin. And the data are actually overwhelming on this. So it's one of the biggest myths that people are convinced of, is that exercise plays a big role in weight loss, and it just doesn't.
When people begin the Bright Line eating program, Susan, do you often recommend that they don't focus on exercise too much in the first few months while they are losing weight, so that ghrelin has some time to adjust to their increased hunger?
That's exactly what I recommend. I recommend that they just rest a bit at the beginning. And so it's partially what you just said, and it's also that the reality is that changing all your food habits takes an enormous amount of willpower up front to establish the habits so that you don't have to use willpower on an ongoing basis in the future. But harnessing that initial motivation when people are really psyched up about a new program that they see working, the weight's coming off, I really want them to focus just on the eating. And getting to the gym burns up a tremendous amount of willpower. We have something I call the willpower gap, which is the gap between the amount of willpower it would take on point, on demand, at every moment to execute the eating that you want to be adhering to nonstop every day, compliant for months and years, compared to what actually happens, which is, what you should do. You're aware that pizza's not the best, and yet it's Friday night, you're exhausted, you just sat in traffic, the kids are hungry, and you turn to your partner and say, let's order a pizza. That's the willpower gap, and people fall into it all the time. The only way to get out of that trap is to automate your eating, just like you've automated your teeth brushing, where you probably successfully now brush your teeth at the end of the day, even if you're tired, even if you're grumpy, even if you've had a bad day, you brush your teeth before bed. That's automaticity. And you got to give yourself a few months to get there with your food. And so I don't want you burning up your focus getting to the gym during those few months. It's very counterproductive.
It takes a few months to build automaticity around food eating, just like it takes to brush our teeth. And exercising has the potential to burn that willpower, to retain that automaticity. Beautiful. Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. That was a fascinating conversation. What are some takeaway, final key points for our listeners?
I want your listeners. Hello, dear listeners. Hi, I just want you to understand, please, please, please take away. Food addiction is real. It's scientifically so concrete that we can point to it on a brain scan. We can look at the brains of cocaine addicts, heroin addicts, and food addicts and see the same dopamine downregulation that's driving the addiction. We can point to it on a PET scan. Food addiction is real. Not everyone is equally affected. For the about 20% of the population that is profoundly affected, bright lines for food will be freeing and they will produce incredible weight loss. And if for whatever reason semaglutide drugs don't work for you, or you can't afford them, or you've tried them and the side effects were too much for you, just know that there is another alternative out there that produces the same amazing results, and it's called bright line eating.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susan. Thank you again for being on Inspinar. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Let's reconnect with the real world. Let's reconnect with what truly matters. Let's reconnect with health, joy, and efficiency. Let's ungrip devices and grip life. I will see you next time.